welcome to Armenian UK. Today with me I have Mr. Eilian Williams, one of our good friends of the Armenian community who has long campaigned for the Armenian cause and in support of Christian minorities around the world. Hello, Mr. Williams. So can we just start as a brief, introduce yourself please, and kind of explain where your background's from and your occupation and your general interest in Armenia.
Well, I'm from a small village in Snowdonia, and well, I probably heard of Armenia first because I read some old manuscripts of the church I belong to, and I noticed that back in 1896 the church members in this really out of the way village had contributed £6 to those suffering in the massacres during that time. And I probably read a few more books about it, in particular Eilian Williams. He was an MP of Welsh descent. He wrote Armenia's tragic story, and I became informed about Armenia through that. And maybe when I was older I read a book called Passage to Ararat by Michael Arlen Jr. And there was something in it that struck me. There was one character, well, it was a true story, who said to him in Yerevan, to be Armenian is to have this unbearable weight of sadness on your soul. And I think that phrase hit me somehow, and I felt, well, I wanted to become Armenian. So.
Right, so further steps for the Armenian cause and commemorative services that you've helped host in Wales as part in commemoration of the Armenian cause.
Well, that was much later in my life when the opportunity arose. But yeah, prior to that, maybe I think I saw a painting of the massacres of Sassoon, and that's what I mentioned to you earlier. And then when I was in Paris, I read a magazine called High Baikar very often, and the opportunity came many years later. Well, actually I went to the Armenian church in Paris and asked the priest, could I be accepted to the Armenian church, and he said no, go to the Greek church because you have to be Armenian or married to an Armenian. So then there was a festival called the Eisteddfod where I lived, which I was organising in the Rhondda Valley, and I invited St Peter's Armenian Church in London's CAIA to come there, and it was led by NagornoKarabakh, and then they came and sang at the festival, and we raised, I think, for £600 for the orphans of Artsakh. And soon after I was invited by Gasparian, who I became friends with and who had been my Armenian teacher before that, to represent the campaign for the recognition of the Armenian genocide in Wales. So the actions I took was I asked one of the assembly members of the new Welsh Assembly to put a statement of opinion recognising the genocide, and slowly over 2 years the majority of the members of the Welsh Assembly, the National Assembly of Wales, they signed. Actually 2/3 of the eligible members signed, and that happened in October 2002. But before that we held a commemorative event on the 24th of April 2001 in the Temple of Peace in Cardiff, and the First Minister of Wales, Rhodri Morgan, he participated by laying flowers at the event. And so by doing that he recognised the genocide on behalf of the Welsh people. Following that there was Gwynedd County Council which is the council of my home area, they voted on the genocide and recognised it unanimously in 2004. I think it was in the spring 2004. Yeah. That was most of what happened during that period.
And I think they became the first municipality in the UK to recognise the Armenian genocide. Yeah, how did you actually get the attention of such authority? How were you able to raise the issue and kind of be heard?
Well, in Gwynedd, after I was invited to speak in Bangor in a cultural centre to introduce Egoyan's film Ararat, and after the film, a young woman introduced herself to me. She said, "I'm Armenian," so we smiled and we became friends. She was called Anahit Amanisian. And together we wrote to the council and met the council leaders, and they were very receptive. I think there is a folk memory in Welsh-speaking Wales of the massacres of 1894-96, because they were in all the Welsh newspapers in a way that the genocide wasn't, because of the shadow of the war. And that was the time my church members collected the money. So there was some kind of memory that something bad had happened in Armenia. And when I was growing up, my mother, when referring to any person with an evil look, she used to say, "He looked at me just like a Turk." Well, that common saying, which I haven't heard for about 30 years now, that came from the folk memory of knowing that they had done something terrible 100 years ago.
So 2007 was a prominent year. You lobbied for the Armenian genocide motion, and you also, the monuments was put up in Wales.
Yes, but
could you kind of explain what precisely and the concept of the motion, as well as the process of putting up the monuments?
Yeah. At the same time, my friend John Petrosyan organised getting permission from the Temple of Peace and the National Assembly of Wales to erect a monument to the genocide, and he organised the ceremony in which the Armenian bishop was there, and the Speaker of the National Assembly, which we call the presiding officer, David Thomas. So that was the last step in the emphatic recognition of the genocide by Wales. And it was disturbed by a couple of hundred Turkish nationalists, but it went ahead with no other problem. So that was the time also I began lobbying members of parliament with an early motion recognizing the genocide in simple terms, and over maybe 12 months, 138 signed, mostly opposition MPs, not many conservatives. That time was Labour government, wasn't it? So they were Labour, Scottish nationalists, Welsh nationalists, and Northern Irish people signed it mostly. I had great faith that would change some things, but it didn't really affect the government at all. Well, one thing that did happen, the minister in the Foreign Office, he requested to meet us, and myself, Christopher Walker, and I think Bernard Nazarian, we all went to discuss with him. So I think they were rattled, and they were probably concerned about it, that there was so much support for recognizing the genocide. And then it was a sign that because of Britain's age-long association with Turkey and their support, and qualified support for Turkey, that was a threat in some way. But after that, that was probably the high point, and we never achieved the same success afterwards. Partly because the emotions years after, some MPs were thinking we've signed once, so no point in signing again. And that was the year also that Ink was murdered, and my involvement with the Armenian Cause after that was mostly organising annual commemoration in the UK Parliament and outside it for the 6 years which followed. And I suppose what do I remember mostly, it was my friend Rajib Sarokulu invited me to the first public gathering commemorating the genocide in Istanbul, and then to a first conference on the genocide in Ankara in 2010. And he took me to Argos offices in Istanbul, and I think what I remember most is the meeting Rahel Dink, and yeah, that was quite unforgettable because I had a feeling for Hrant that he was the same age as me, and I wanted to meet him one day, but that was not to happen.
Yeah. So, kind of skipping forward a little bit, unfortunately we're in 2020, but the British government is yet to recognise the Armenian genocide, and what support do you think throughout the years it's gained or kind of lost, and what can be done further, kind of what strategies would you suggest for the upcoming generation to take, if there are any?
Yeah. I feel that Britain is an entrenched pro-Turkish position, and that cannot be changed. So I feel, what have we got to lose, really? We Armenians take care to always be very respectful, and maybe by taking that attitude we don't achieve so much, I would prefer more radical action to expose Britain's betrayals of Armenia. I did write a piece, Britain's 39 betrayals of Armenia once, and I have no sympathy for the British position, and maybe I would like to see the commemorative events on the Remembrance Sunday disrupted in some way, and that Britain's betrayals of Armenia would be exposed, and that they would have to face the issue. One MP rated as saying, don't rake up the past all the time. Well, if it is okay to commemorate the Great War, well, why not commemorate the genocide at the same time? And Gallipoli obviously happened at the same time as the 24th of April. Maybe there was a connection.
You mentioned that you've written a piece on it. Are there any other publications that you've done about Armenia, and what are your views that are expressed within those?
Well, they were on the internet, but maybe we should go and search for them. We never published them, the speeches of people who took part in our conference, especially Des Fernandez and Professor Khachador Pilikian and many others. Yeah, maybe look, collecting them, publishing them one day might be useful.
Yeah. You mentioned the don't bring up the past, but unfortunately we see history repeating itself in the 21st century today. What are your views on the current Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that's happening?
It is disheartening that Europe and UK, Russia and America, they are doing nothing to help. And maybe when I saw this week the names of so many young men killed in Artsakh, I feel we should take urgent action and not be so polite with the British government, and demand military action as well as sanctions. So.
Yeah. To what extent do you think that the current conflict is another attempt for genocide, and it's basically history of repeating itself? And as a champion for Christian minorities, do you think that the conflict holds some religious grounds as well?
Yes, it does, in the way that it's attracting the jihadis from Syria and other support from the Muslim world, but it's basically a Turkish expansionist war, and maybe we should concentrate more on that than the religious dimension.
What do you see as kind of a step towards the resolution of the conflict? Or kind of the recognition towards the Armenian cause as well, and the conflict itself?
I think there is no stop to the Turkish murderous military machine unless Russia steps in and helps. I think the future is very bleak. I cannot see the EU or America helping, and Britain is the worst of all in supporting Turkey in every way. So maybe as Turkey's staunchest ally, we should take more decisive steps against the British government here.
Since the impact of Wales has been more prominent in the past, do you think by kind of the UK Armenian population kind of strategizing and impacting Wales, who can then impact the overall UK government, do you think that would be a strategy?
Yes, it can be a shaming strategy by the Welsh and Scottish parliaments making public declarations. They have been reluctant to do that, but with increasing polarity between London and the Welsh and Scottish parliaments, that's possible, and that could be a good strategy.
Just kind of something outside of conflict. Have you ever visited Armenia? And
I was invited by the British parliamentary group once, but the visit was cancelled. So I never got around to it after. The nearest I've been to Armenia is when I went to Iraq in 2008, and I visited an Armenian village called Havrej near Zakho, and that was after the Islamic terrorists had killed many Christians in Mosul. Then I was in there for a conference on the Anfal, and then the Kurdish government gave me a taxi and interpreter, and I went to interview them in Havrej. And even though the Kurdish government had built houses for them, all the lands had been taken away, and they were not able to sustain themselves. But few of them spoke Armenian, they spoke mainly Arabic. But they were people who had come to settle in that area after the genocide.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you have a chance to go to Armenia soon. And you've already kind of started talking about it, but besides the Armenian cause, you've been fighting other cases of injustice towards minority groups around the world. Could you go on a bit more detail about that?
Well, since the centenary passed, the main issue has been, to me, the Yazidi genocide, and we invited a young woman who had been abducted by Islamic State from Germany to speak in Parliament here. There was a lot of sympathy, and Parliament voted in 2016 unanimously, 212 I think votes to none, to recognise the Yazidi genocide, but that didn't affect the government's position one bit. And we can count on one hand how many Yazidis from Iraq have been given asylum in this country. that non-Muslim minorities are discriminated against. And it's been but I cooperate with other minorities, Baluchis and Kurds and Assyrians in the past, and Mapuche minority in Chile. So, there have been a few attempts to have a collective voice for stateless nations, and I wish that could happen. Really, I attempted to do that, but there are always hope.
So, as of today, do you believe there's more of an impact that you can have on the current situation that's happening in NagornoKarabakh after?
I'm not hopeful. I just feel in my heart, what should I do, and how can I volunteer and get a passport quickly, and is there any pathway to help in some way in Erzach? So, I will try to find out that soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming today. It was a pleasure having you, and thank you for all you've done for the Armenian cause and for minorities and social justice in general. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.